Nick walks out and goes, "Hey, look, Mom, that's Eric, Matt's uncle. He was the guy that was almost a Navy SEAL." It hit me like a dart right to the chest. And not let one of the first things my children witness is me give up on my dream.
Odds of making it to SEAL training apparently aren't very high. Once you're there, washout rate is, I think, like 90%.
I just kept slumping into the snow. And then I'd sit there and I'd think about my kids. What would they do? What would I want them to see? So I got myself back up, finished it, stumbled into camp. Kids can motivate you. I have a formula: PTSD, passion, strength, time, desire. During SEAL training, be just getting hammered, spitting slobber, bloody in the sand, and I'd see a shell and I'd pick up shells, put them in my pocket so I could bring them home to them. Creator of everything, I'm making human beings and I'm giving them a purpose to fulfill, and it applies to the building of my kingdom. What force would want to distract people from that? Not a good one. That starts to fall under spiritual warfare. Last mission I was on, top secret, and there was only 3 of us. Never before did I feel this. If somebody turns on us, game over. I remember getting home, I was like, oh, thank God.
What happens when one of the deadliest Navy SEAL snipers in modern warfare sits down to talk about pressure, purpose, and the moments that forge a man? On this episode of the No Surrender Show, we're joined by Eric Davis, former Navy SEAL sniper, elite sniper instructor, and the man responsible for training legendary warriors like Chris Kyle and Marcus Luttrell. But this conversation goes far beyond combat. Eric opens up about the mindset required to survive high-stakes environments, the discipline it takes to lead men under pressure, and the brutal reality of what separates those who break from those who endure. From sniper training and battlefield lessons to faith, resilience, leadership, and identity, this is a raw look into the psychology of elite performance. If you've ever faced adversity, questioned your purpose, or wanted to understand what true mental toughness actually looks like, this episode delivers at the highest level. This is not Hollywood. This is earned wisdom from a man who lived it. But before we start, we'd be very grateful if you'd like, subscribe, and share our episodes, as we're here to help as many people as possible via shared no surrender stories, and we'll get there much faster with your continued support. This is No Surrender. Thank you. This episode is brought to you by our partners over at Don't Trade It In. It's the best and fastest way to get top dollar for your car from the comfort of your home. Please visit don'ttradeitin.com today. All right, folks, got Eric Davis here, former Navy SEAL sniper, author. Raising Men is his book, and just finished it myself. Phenomenal book, and we are going to be talking about some great stuff here. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. Glad to be here.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We've had your buddy Larry Yatch. He was on the show. We've had Mark Devine on the show. All 3 of you guys actually are former Navy SEALs, and hence the name of the show, No Surrender. We're here to help people through shared stories of trials, tribulations, comebacks, stuff like that. I'll kind of just dive right in to something that I've noticed with both Mark, Larry, and then again, finishing your book. You guys, SEALs more specifically, go through so much in training that the odds of making it to SEAL training apparently aren't very high. Then once you're there, the washout rate, or whatever you want to call it, is, I think, like 90%. And with all that being said, there is this recurring theme of dealing with a lot of pain, so much pain that you get to the point where you almost start to enjoy it, or it becomes like you are the pain, but not in a bad way. If you could kind of elaborate on the process, how that happens. And I think the obvious answer might be that you just have to go through a lot over and over again on the one hand, but if you could elaborate on how individuals like you guys and other SEALs and other top performers get to that point where you can just handle so much more than the average person.
First, what people would think about would be something like resilience. And another thing would be mental toughness. And I'll cover those. Those are pretty obvious. Those are typically expected from SEAL types. I get a lot of questions about those. I do not believe those to be the strongest of the things that allow us to endure such discomfort and pain. I would say, so I have a formula that I teach to my members. These are like entrepreneurs, business owners, executives, guys like that. And it's the habit building formula. and it goes PTSD, which has nothing to do with PTSD. It just happened to work out that way. But it goes passion, strength, time, desire. So here's what I mean by that. If you ever look at like an ultra marathoner, there's people out there running 100-mile races. I think there's people doing 200-mile races. And you watch people in SEAL training. So, in the context of passion, or I could interchange passion with personality, right? Passion or personality, however you want to think about it, like your true self. We're typically not witnessing these huge acts of discipline or mental toughness. I believe that for the most part, we are witnessing somebody operating within their natural state of flow. It's their natural type of self, it's who they are. You mentioned Larry Yatch. Larry Yatch is probably the exception. There definitely are guys who make it through SEAL training out of pure grit and mental toughness and can endure pain and they don't like it and they can just keep going no matter what. Larry Yatch is one of the best examples of that. He is a master of discipline, self regulation, mental management, all of that. I would be the other guy. I am inherently drawn towards operating as my authentic self, being in my own passion. So, first, I'd say it's passion, personality, and we could even say purpose. Like this thing has a great meaning to us. So, for me, becoming a SEAL wasn't just getting the trident and getting to wear the t shirts and everything like that, although those were for sure a big part of it, especially at a young age. That was exciting. But I also equated becoming a SEAL with giving me all of the things I would need to succeed later on in life. So, yes, it's uncomfortable, but every bit of discomfort was just proof that I was transforming into a different kind of self that was going to be this kind of self that was going to live a very particular kind of life. Now, it goes personality, time, strength, desire. So, obviously, time's part of that formula. So, you're in the Navy, you have all the time in the world to be at SEAL training. So, a lot of people can't hold a habit or change businesses or start a new job or write a book or whatever it is because they just really don't have the time to do it. They have too many things going on in their lives, right? Right. So, that's just a real mechanical factor. The strength stuff, the strength stuff, mental toughness, resilience. So, what is resilience? Resilience is the ability to basically get hit, take a beating, and then get back up the next day and do it again. People always think about that as being just this pure toughness, this just pure grit, once again. But if you really think about it, well, what does that mean? Like when we work out, we break our muscles down. And then what do we do to make sure that we can go to the gym the next day or the day after? Well, we're really good at recovery. So that's another thing. You can take a lot of pain, a lot of beatings if you know how to recover. I was a medic, so I was a corpsman, what they call a corpsman, that's a medic. And I'd been with the Marine Reconnaissance Unit for years before I went to SEAL training. So I already knew how to diagnose and treat people on my own. When I was 18 years old, I ran an SDD clinic all by myself. So did the lab, did the diagnosis, did the treatment. I was just into it. I would study it, I'd figure out the problem, I would do it. Anyways, go to SEAL training. The instructors gave me all of the medications. So my drawers were full of all these drugs, medications, all this stuff. When they do room inspection, and if they didn't know me, I'm like hitting the surf. They'd be like, "What the hell, Davis? What do you got all this stuff?" But anyways, my point being, I was the guy that the students would come to. And one of the things I noticed is there was guys that would quit SEAL training by way of not taking care of themselves, not being resilient. So to be resilient means that we have to recover ourselves. We need to hydrate, we need to stretch, take Motrin, contrast baths, whatever. So the resilience that you'll see in SEALs, what they are is guys who know how to take care of themselves so they can get back in the fight. Does that make sense how I'm saying that? That's
Definitely.
how you see, yeah, that's how you see us do this. Now, mental toughness, that's for sure a raw part of the pillar here. I was just talking to my daughter. She's starting to train for a marathon. She's always said that she hates running. She started to run though. She's getting it done. She texted me and said, "Hey, cut 4 minutes out of my mile." Right? She's starting off slow and she goes, "And I'm starting to like it." What I explained to her, I'm like, "Oh, what is happening is you're developing mental toughness. Just like your legs and your body and your cardiovascular system are getting strong every time you run, well, your mind is also getting stronger as well. If you hated running, a 10-minute run can be horrible. But if you do a 10-minute run over and over again, pretty soon your body, the physicality of it gets easier, the endorphins kick in, and then all of a sudden your mental game kicks in as well. And then you start to learn like, oh, this isn't so bad. I can't imagine going for 3 hours, but I can definitely imagine going for another 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So again, mental toughness, when we're talking about that, that is a developed muscle. So you're seeing people typically operating inside of their passion. So when they're inside of their passion, right, they're going to repeat the activity over and over again. So not only physically do they get stronger, but mentally they get stronger as well. And I don't mean mentally strong like a characteristic trait, although it is. No kidding. Mentally, our brain grew. I mean, not literally grew, but our brain grew so that the burden of going through a day of SEAL training was not that bad. By the time I'd got there, I'd already been in another special operations training, and it was no big deal at all. I didn't mind it at all because my brain and my body were used to it.
So yeah, then the repetitions over time are there's pretty much no substitute for that, it seems. Like you've got a point that you have to get to in order to become a SEAL or whatever the mission is. There's really no shortcut. I will say, and as you touched on, it sounds like the passion or purpose is very helpful. You know, if you find something, or I'll say when you find something, because I genuinely hope everyone does find that something that they're genuinely passionate about, that helps. But at the end of the day, there's no real shortcut.
Yeah, it is repetitions. It's no different than if someone's going to run a marathon under 4 hours. They're going to have to do repetitions. I mean, some bodies and cardiovascular systems are stamped out a little further ahead. But when you get to the extremes, right? When you get to 100-mile races or SEAL training, like nobody's stamped out just ready for that. So it's repetition. We live in the most competitive, dynamic, technologically advanced marketplace this planet's ever seen, right? And it's competitive. That's why passion is so important. I always say it's not that competitive. It's not like we're competing against an NFL Super Bowl team. We're competing like against high school teams. A decent high school team, what are they going to have? They're going to have a coach. A coach has studied the basics of football. He's created a playbook. They run the plays in the playbook, and then they stop, start, and modify what works and doesn't work in the playbook, and they go back and run them again. I just do that every day. And I don't know if you know my backstory, but I got cancer. I got sick. I was out for a couple of years. But
Oh,
just
wow.
because I was doing that stuff, I'm still standing, still living, still, you know what I mean? Everything's fine. And just a note on passion too. So passion is something that I teach very, very pragmatically. So or if you're talking about SEAL training, I do believe one of the reasons that the attrition rate is so high is they're not doing anything to screen for, is this in somebody's passion wheelhouse, right? And I'll just give you the quick thing on passion. We can unpack it later if you want. But where people go wrong about passion is they typically think of a noun. People think they're passionate about becoming a writer, passionate about becoming a SEAL. Let's just unpack the SEAL thing. Yeah, when I was younger, I would have said I'm passionate about being a SEAL, but that's a noun. Passion is all of the little verbs that, when acted upon, will produce the what. So it wasn't so that I was so fired up about being a SEAL. Sure, I was young. I turned 18 in boot camp. I came in very young, and I like saw those guys in their blue and gold shirts, and I was enamored with it. Absolutely. So I would have thought that was my passion. But I was also that kid that played outside, even when it was raining, even when it was cold. I'm running around, you know what I mean? Running around all over the place. They probably would have tried to medicate me if I grew up in a different time, which would have been horrible, right? But I was passionate about the little verbs. So what I like to do at the core of my passion is wake up and go at about 80 to 95% at something that I believe is going to make my future work out for me. Doesn't have to be a SEAL. So that's the beauty of passion. I always like to bring that up when I'm talking about passion. It really can free people, even in their current jobs. Most people are doing their jobs wrong. They're not using their passion, and they think to use their passion, they have to change jobs, but that's not true. You just change how you do what you're already doing.
I really love that topic because they say that it's something like 70% of Americans are actively disengaged at work. And the last 10 years, I've spent building my current businesses. 5 years prior to that, I spent my way making my way through the ranks at big box automotive groups. 4 or 5 years before that, I was an entrepreneur also. And it's really interesting. Like, I am passionate about cool cars and pretty much anything with a motor in it that you can ride on, racing and stuff like that. So I ended up in the car business on the one hand. On the other hand, a lot of the things that I've had to do as an entrepreneur, like even the second time, I started out as a one man show. We expanded 8 times in the first 8 years. We did all these things that were cool and fun. And then the crap hit the fan with the economy when there were like over 10 consecutive rate hikes starting in the end of the first quarter of 2022, that just anything that was rate sensitive from a purchase standpoint, those industries were really, almost all of them were affected in negative ways. And I had to go from being the strategic leader and focusing on growth all the way back down to the boots on the ground level, doing things that I didn't enjoy doing, not only for myself, but for other companies. When I worked for other companies, and you realize when that crap hits the fan and you're doing those things again and everything is on the line, that like it's almost like an ego death. Aaron Rodgers like touches on that a lot. You think you know who you are, and then something crazy happens, and you realize a lot of things that you don't enjoy doing are worth doing when if you don't do them, like, things are just gonna get exponentially worse. I guess to kinda come full circle, a lot of people who are sitting at their desk, working away and thinking they hate their jobs, and they think that the grass is greener on the other side. In many cases, they find out that the grass is greener on the other side only because it's fertilized with shit. You know? It's like this, and you touched on it in a number of places in your book. Like, there's a similar percentage of people, both kids and adults in the United States right now, who are out of shape. I think it's more like 80%, or they don't meet the minimum thresholds for, I think, both cardiovascular exercise and more of the anaerobic type exercise. You mentioned unpacking it. I'm interested to see what else you have to say as far as things we could touch on to help people get closer to that passionate, I guess you could say, phase where they're not focusing on being unhappy at work, or not thinking they're unhappy at work, but maybe finding ways to be happier in general.
Yeah, and how I would approach it, like you mentioned the grass is greener, and we've probably always heard the comment, no matter where you go, you're always there. So what's happening when people think the grass is greener, they're locking onto the now, right? So when they think about, or I get it, not a lot. I'm not like, oh, everybody asks me questions, but people will want to know about being a writer and an author. And what they think about when they think about that job is the lifestyle. Yes, autonomy, freedom. You can work from anywhere, anytime. You're 100% free. If you're a successful author, you can do anything you want, which is its own kind of a trap. But um, they could go over into that kind of world. But if they don't understand their passion, they're still going to be operating with what they think they ought to be doing or how they think they should be doing it, rather than operating within their passion. And no matter what the situation is, the passion is always available. Again, it's not what we do, it's how we do it. So the quick answer is you pay attention to those things. What are the activities that have you in flow state? What topics? So you're mentioning the cars, so that's important. Like, that's topics. So for me, cars, if it was something that I couldn't write about cars, not that I don't like to drive in them, but I'm not interested in them. I'm not interested in a lot of things, actually, it turns out. So topics. The other thing is, where have they had success? How have they done things in a certain way that was natural to them, that had them in flow state, and people said, yes, that's really good. And then your environment. What does the people and the walls around you look like? Those are elements. I mean, I could break that down more, but those are some core elements to passion. And it's available to anyone at any time. Matter of fact, a lot of the people I work with, because what happens is they realize they're losing the war between generating large sums of money and having the time and energy to take care of themselves, their body, their family, their ability to have fun, adventure, stuff like that, right? They're at odds between their personal life and their professional life. That's what I can summarize what I do. That's what I do, is I fix that for people. And we don't have them fight each other anymore. So once they start to understand how to use their passion, they start to get better at the things they do. And then they can step out of that tension, right? Where those two things harmoniously work together. Because another thing about passion is it's also very pragmatic. So when people are operating outside their passion, they're competing against guys like me that wake up and inherently want to do all of the things that make me successful in this business. So if something changes, I'm like, great, let me read another book, let me study another YouTube video, whatever it is. I'm passionate about the topic, right? So I'll pull it in. So a lot of people are just getting their butts handed to them because it's like they're going to a weightlifting contest, but they have the body and the mentality of a marathoner. Of course, they're going to get their butt kicked. And I see that happen with guys, especially guys, all the time, left and right. Not harp on the passion thing, but it's very discoverable. It's already there. It's actually, it's really just a process. It's like a 5-part writing assignment where you can unpack all that stuff. And then you can look at what you do now and then, oh, I can do that differently. My thing with fatherhood is become the man you want your son to be if you're talking about raising men. One, so you can lead from the front. Two, so your kid has an example. But three, another point with information. Three, where AI starts to drop off, and again, I love AI, but I just happened to listen to this earlier today, is you don't have the stories. So, like, somebody can fake going at the top of Everest, but if you're talking to them, it'd be pretty quick. You'd be like, I don't hear any story about him crapping in his pants or his gear. You know what I mean? Like, didn't they run out of food? Did he get hungry? Like, surely it wasn't just this technical ascent, right? So that's the same with raising men. I'm like, that's because you have to go through that stuff, the gauntlet, right? That's why you couldn't raise a girl or a boy to live their authentic self and harmoniously care for their purposes so they can live a good life now and the 30 plus years old age where they can no longer, you can't do it unless you're doing it yourself because that's when you run into the stuff. It is like my daughter's talking about life, and I'm like, yeah, if you're gonna live this kind of life, like what we're talking about here, you're gonna have to go to bed on time, even as an adult. No way to do it. You can't. You're not gonna compete with people who are well rested. It's just, and I know that because I've drank too much and not go to bed on time.
Absolutely, absolutely, and if I remember correctly, I think I saw something or read something in your book about did you go to Buds twice? Did you leave and come
Sure
back?
did.
You did?
Oh yeah,
Did you get like pneumonia or something like that?
I got pneumonia the second time, the morning of the beginning of dive phase, which is a really inconvenient time for a pneumonia. My father was bishop of our church, captain of the sheriff's department in the county I lived in. He was everything to me. And all I wanted to do was be just like him. That I 100% was going to be just like him. About 14, 15 time zone, he got sick, checked out of my life, ended up in nursing homes for decades. So he wasn't available to me. My older brother stepped in to fill that role for me. So that's the background. So I'm going through life. I go to Marine Reconnaissance. I become a recon corpsman. I go to their basic reconnaissance course. So that at the time that was their special operations. Now I believe reconnaissance belongs to special forces and everything like they're all funded now, I think. But I started there, so I'd already done some stuff. But I came in to be a SEAL, and I'd failed a color vision test in MEPS. And that's why I didn't go straight to SEAL training. Just like barely on the edge because I passed them since. But if I didn't fail that, I would have gone straight through SEAL training, would have been fine. But at this point, I'd already been there, already had a couple kids. I was talking to my brother on the payphone. If people don't know what payphones are, Google them. But I would talk to him on the payphone. And I forget what we were talking about. I don't think I was complaining about anything. I liked it. Like I said, I'd already developed myself, not intentionally, but I already developed myself and I came stamped out with that inherently part of my biology is to just keep going, oh, fast, 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 over and over again. Teachers loved me, right? Matter of fact, when my brother went in the army, I was so close to him, I started cutting school, but I was in the first grade. That's a pretty unique accomplishment that young to start cutting school. Anyway, so I'm talking to him and I think one of the things that happened to both my father and my brother was this idea of what I call responsible compromise, meaning we men will do this. They think you hear this in fathers a lot, this idea of sacrifice for my family, like they're a goat in the Old Testament. I'm like, what do you mean sacrifice? for your family, because when then I'm like, well, what are you going to lead your sons and your daughters to do? Live a life of, I don't mean, I don't mean the real kind of sacrifice, like godly sacrifice. I mean, like just sacrifice my health and my happiness and everything like that. And I think there's something going on. I haven't unpacked it, but there's some sort of, oh, I'm not going to do this thing because I need to be there for my kids or something like that. And basically, my brother gave me the, hey, I pay more in taxes than you're ever going to make as a SEAL. He didn't do it in a mean way, but he just was talking to me about the kids. And I had his kids were everything to him. They were his number one, which that's a huge problem, right? Nothing should always be the number one. And it eventually took him out too. But I was like, yeah, you're right. Okay, I already was Marine reconnaissance. I got to do some stuff. So I quit and I went and I started selling insurance for him. And by the way, selling insurance is not a compromise for me. I like selling. And this is one of my favorite things to teach is sales and influence, actually, which works really good for intelligence work. Anyways, yeah, so I quit. And then how the story goes, I was, I don't know, a good chunk of months into selling insurance with him. And my nephew's best friend, his name is Nick. I was in the front of my brother's house jumping in one of those inflatable jumpy things. It must have been someone's birthday. And Nick walks out and his mom's behind him and he goes, hey, look, mom, that's Eric, Matt's uncle. He was the guy that was almost a Navy SEAL. And it was like, I mean, it hit me like a dart right to the chest. I was like, oh my gosh. And it was like that. I'm like, I cannot let one of the first things my children witness is me give up on my dream. Now, it wasn't me quitting. I don't have a problem with quitting. Quitting is appropriate in a lot of situations. But what it was is I didn't take the next step that was inherently aligned with who I authentically was as a human being, especially at that age. I didn't take that next step and I put it under the cloak of this like responsible sacrifice. You know what I mean? This responsible compromise. And I was like, I'm not going to, in my mind, that like this is something that's ran in my family. Men haven't lived who they truly are for whatever reason. And I always would hear about the kids and the family. And I'm like, I'm going to be gone. I'm going to be away. But my kids are going to watch somebody living their passion. They're going to watch someone live their authentic self and make a good life doing it. Now, I was very young still. I mean, I was just barely mid 20s. Then I came back and I passed, no problem. And then the rest, well, some of it's history, and then the rest is now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were actually in buds when you quit, or you were about to be, or where were you in the process?
I was in training, having a great old time, and it was hard. I had to like muster up the courage to do it the next morning. And as soon as I went to tell the instructor, San Diego Bay, I was looking east. I can see the Coronado Bridge. We're getting ready to go in the water. And I went and told him, and I remember one of my buddies, Ripatella, came and just pushed me. It's like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I just pushed back, and I went and I quit, and it was really tough, and because I knew I was supposed to be there.
Yeah, I can relate. Not from a SEAL standpoint, but one of the reasons I'm as tenacious as I am is because everyone, I think, does things like that and then they regret those decisions sometimes for the rest of their lives. On the one hand, on the other hand, if you make changes like you did, and I have in many cases too, you go back and not only do you do it even better. And as you said, the rest is then, or a lot is then history, you know, and you're a better, stronger person for it. It's ironic that you told that story in that way because if I remember correctly, when you ultimately did make the decision, well, before you made the decision to leave the SEALs for good, there was a situation, I believe, where you were, I think it was some sort of a navigation test and it was really cold and you literally almost died. Like you had frozen toes. It was incredibly difficult on the one hand. On the other hand, you got to a point where you were like literally crawling through the snow. You'd gotten lost or something like that. And again, you could have literally died. Speaking of children, on the bounce house or whatever it was, when you heard what you needed to hear to come back to Buds and make it through, Wasn't it something in your mind, like thinking about your children or something like that, that kept you going in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, because of the situation with my father, what had always driven me was to be a father, but not just a present father. I was just shooting a video about this, not just an emotionally available father, because I'm like, present for what? Like, most fathers have no philosophy in life. They're just like, well, who cares if you're present? You're not going to teach them how to live a good life anyways, right? And I don't mean that mean, but I'm like, I didn't, it wasn't like, oh, I just didn't want to be like, oh, just a good dad because I'm there. I wanted to really show them how to live a good life, which now, as I would speak it, how you do it is you learn how to use your passions to harmoniously fulfill all of your purposes. It's not so simple to do, but like that's at the key. So that was always a driver for me. So during SEAL training, there's two things I would do that were really connected to my older kids. One, I'd be just getting hammered, spitting slobber, whatever, bloody in the sand, and I'd see a shell and I'd pick up shells and I'd put them in my pocket so I could bring them home to them. Like, they're always there for me. Even just yesterday, I was missing my oldest daughter. Like, they're just there for me, and I don't think to be a good dad, you need to have those kind of feelings. I just inherently, like, was kinda just built for it. But I would think, what would I do right now if my kids were watching me? Doing flutter kicks and I'm cheating and putting my heels down a little bit. I'm like, well, what would I do if my kids were watching? I'm like, okay, I can right now I see them standing on a sand berm looking at me. I know exactly the gate. I can tell you exactly where it is. I'm like, oh, they're right there looking. Like, what would I do? So I was on this navigation course in Buds. This is third phase in Buds. And it's in Mount Laguna, which is just east of San Diego. And it was snowing. There was snow on the ground. That's not supposed to happen. It's not even supposed to rain out there. Like, we pay taxes for that stuff not to happen. No rain, no bugs. But there it was, snow all over the
Huh.
place. And in SEAL training, they're not like, oh, we're going to go get you some cold weather gear. They're just like, oh, yeah, sorry, guys, cotton kills. Be careful. So I do this navigation. This is my second time through a hard navigation course, because in Marine Reconnaissance, I did it too. And both times I would say I passed. I was one of the guys who would pass, but I'm still like, man, I can't believe I passed each time. And I made the mistake. I went over this steep hill, back down, and I'm like, oh my gosh, wrong way. 180 mistake, came all the way back down. And it was a tough one. And I remember my toenail had come off, like I threw it in the snow. I had Ziploc bags on my boots, and the boots were bait lights. It was almost like a tennis shoe with a fake leather top, and which is much better to run in, but not great for the snow. And then I was like panicked. Like, I don't know about panicked, but like, oh shit, I gotta go. So then I ran back up the hill and I just went hard and got a little lost again. And then all of a sudden I was like, man, I'm in trouble here. You're out there for a week too. I believe it's a week, right? So I've been already been out there for a little while going through some arduous stuff. And I come back into camp and I just kind of like on my way back into camp, I remember stopping. I would think about them. I think I was one of the few reservists to ever go to SEAL training, because when I came back in, I came as a reservist. So if I were to fail, I would just get out. And I remember thinking like, oh, okay, LAPD, because that's always where I wanted to go eventually. And thinking about that, and I stumbled into camp and they're like, you failed. And I'm like, oh, I know this sucks. And I was already like, everyone could tell I was stumbling in. They're like, hey, Davis, okay, go get some food, get ready. You're going to go back out and test again. And usually you test again the next day. So I did the whole thing again. It was so bad that there was another corpsman in the class and he was on a retest and he wouldn't leave, not my side, but he wouldn't leave too far. He kept watching me. And then that time on the way back, I just kept slumping. I got my points, obviously, and I just kept slumping into the snow. And then I'd sit there and I'd think about my kids and like, oh God, like, what would they do? What would I want them to see? So I got myself back up. What would they want me to see? And dreams of LAPD and all these things are going through my head. But I'd finished it and I stumbled into camp. And the next thing I remember, I was in like two sleeping bags with propane space heaters going on me inside of a tent, and I woke up to that. That was probably, I guess, the coolest story about how kids can motivate you. And again, I was like, I wanted to be a certain kind of dad that they can emulate.
If we fast forward now to when you ended up retiring from the SEALs, can you tell us about what led you to that decision?
The last operation I did or last mission I was on, it was what they call top secret SAP, which is special access program. So there was people with top secret clearances supporting us who didn't know who I was or didn't know that I was even part of the mission that they were supporting. There was an entire pararescue team who had no idea where I was going. They knew I was on the mission. They didn't even know where we were, which is a bummer because we were not close. And there was only three of us. There was only three SEALs and hundreds of all kinds of people around us. So it was a big concern. But on my way out, they stopped us off in Washington, briefed with the CIA, Team Sick, like the whole thing. It was the tiniest end of the spear. Like that. That's what guys would say. Like, hey, this is the tip of the spear. This is the craziest thing we're out there doing. And I remember, like, okay, I mean, there's definitely cooler things people have done than what I was doing. I thought we were basically hunting terrorists, collecting intelligence, and hoping to capture them, and that's a big long-term mission, right? And I got home and I remember being like, man, I never before did I feel this. Like there's just an exposure when there's just three of you and you're surrounded. I'm like, geez, Louise, that's if somebody turns on us, that's game over. That's getting hung by a bridge on fire kind of thing. And I remember getting home, I was like, oh, thank God. I was like legit before I've done many ship takedowns, other, stuff like that. And I'm like, you just feel like the NFL football team just plowing through a JV, high school team, right? At least like we're good. And my oldest daughter was going into high school. And I just thought like, all right, anything else, if I keep going, that's going to be just for me. Just, it's got to be selfish now. Like I did what I came to do. I was getting out of the Navy before September 11th. I was on post deployment leave. That's when I was going to go to LAPD. I reenlisted just to go to war, just to support that. Then I ended up on this mission. I was like, okay, I did everything I could do. And also, too, being in insurance for a little while, part of insurance is a lot of financial planning. There's a lot of financial stuff around there. And I also knew the numbers. I also knew that a Navy retirement isn't going to do it anyways. So I did the math and I just thought, okay, I'm home, I'm alive, I've double digits. People that I knew died at that point. I'm just thinking, my my kids are there's a lot more for me to learn and to teach them. And to do that, I'm going to have to be home and I'm going to have to go out into the marketplace and show them how to do it outside of a government institution, so I can show them how to really live this life.
Yeah, when you retired, you came out in 2008 or so. What were your next steps after you got out? What did you do for work and move forward from the SEALs?
One of the things that's really saved me is I knew being a SEAL, you get treated differently and there's a lot of opportunity available to you and you get to do a lot of things. But I never thought like those things were happening to me because of just me being Eric. I knew I was able to do these things because I was trained so heavily. And all I knew for the most part, all I like when I'd work with LAPD, their snipers one time, they were talking about like, oh my gosh, man, how do you know so much about this? I'm like, 99.9% of what I do is train. Like I train for years. You guys are operating all the time. You only have a little bit of time to train. It's different. And so luckily I knew that. Like, okay, well, I'm going into a competitive environment. I didn't really know anything about 2008. I don't even think I even get actually if I did, like I wouldn't care because after you're a SEAL, you're at least arrogant enough to think you're going to be the best anyway. Which would be pure arrogance, but that works. That got me out. I got started. But I started investing heavily in education. I went to a very unique kind of business school that taught me, I bet I'd say on a fundamental level, how humans operate, how businesses operate, and how value is produced. And how you do that is you have to really learn about what matters to a human, and then you can really deliver a whole lot of value in leadership. So I studied with them for years. I would spend $10,000, $20,000 a year on training just because, again, I was arrogant enough to think, yeah, low economy, I can do it because I'm a SEAL. But I was also confident because I also knew what training does for somebody. So I'd started that actually before I got out. And just your language changes, right? Like these things about passion, fulfilling purpose, all of this stuff that I'm talking about, I didn't make that stuff up. Those are from geniuses, right? So I'm walking around having conversations like that. And then the Navy offered me a contract. Hey, the same command I left, hey, can you come consult for us for a while? And then a defense contractor offered me the same thing. And then I met people in business and they're like, oh my gosh, I've never heard anything like that before. Can you come in and teach leadership? And can a big one, I made a COO of a financial firm come in and teach sales and performance through process and put those systems in place for us. And it just went very well. Now, did I spend plenty of time always wondering where my income was going to come in 90 more days? Oh my gosh, I sure did. Was I in a business that ran out of money all of a sudden and it was just over? And was I living in South Orange County, San Clemente, and just bought 2 houses in 2008? During that time, for sure. I had my moment being on my office floor, breathing like, oh my gosh, how is this? But it's like real life, like, no kidding, you're going to run out of money kind of stuff. Yeah, so I went through all the ups and downs with all of that. And that's why you hear, like, when you hear me go into passion or purpose, or we were talking about prioritizing by power, what that is, it's a curriculum that I developed. Because the thing is, with my kids, this all started when I told you about that mind map of all the parts of life. I'm like, oh, I'm going to build this thing out so I could lead my kids and then I can hand it over to them. And that was my progression. I was consulting, I was developing this philosophy for my own life. And then what happened is that all the money coming from consulting was just too easy, right? And they call that a shadow calling, or I was told that's called a shadow calling. I see a lot of men get caught up in this. We're like, oh, we're good at it. People want you to do it and they pay you a bunch of money, but it's not really your ultimate thing and you know it. And so eventually I came to the spot where a consulting contract had ended and I could have either gone and found another one, which always felt daunting, even though I had done it for, I don't know, by at that point, I'd done it for, geez, 10, 11 years straight with never missing. Or I could go out on my own and start this online membership site that I have now. And so that whole time from the time I left the Navy, it was literally me scratching out a way to figure out how to, I didn't have the language for it, but how to use my passions to harmoniously fulfill my personal, financial, and professional purposes. And I'll repeat myself with stuff like that a lot because people need to hear it. But if you think about harmoniously fulfilling those things, that means those things are all cared for. Fitness, like the dad who's not working out, the dad who's not doing stuff for fun, doesn't have any buddies, you know what I mean? Whatever these things are. So that's what I was doing the whole time. One of the challenges during that transition is, and that's where a lot of my confidence came from. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of education and knowledge out there that are talking about people living a life of freedom, right? Like not having to chase a paycheck and all this stuff. But that was kind of the problem. What I did is I had that business course, that the deep fundamentals of life, which was, thank God I had that. But then I went through that and then I started to find specific things for business, for entrepreneurship, things like that. And you know what? It turns out that those things aren't really there to transform you or have you go to the next level. They're typically there just to sell more books. So that hit me hard. And there was a moment where I thought, oh, geez, I might have made a big mistake here. I'm making this transition. And then I sat and reflected on that. And that last mission I was talking about is my role. The title of that is called the AFO, Advanced Force Operator. And what an advanced force operator does, it's on the tip of the spear, right? But what we do is we go into environments that are denied to Americans. Like we go places we're not allowed to be, not supposed to be, and we'll get in real big trouble if someone finds out we're there. But we prepare the environment. We set the environment up so other special forces units actually can come in and operate safely and dominate. So what hit me was I was in the same situation. I was like, okay, I had my formula starting to form in my head, right? Passion, fulfill all of my purposes. I don't have to compromise on anything. I can really handle this all. I know I can do it. And then in that world of AFO, there's something called find, fix, and finish. and then it goes on to access and placement. But how that all goes is what you do is you find somebody who is living the kind of life you are talking about or wanting to live. And I found that person and I started to study what he was doing. And that was my saving grace. And that's where this whole fundamental formula now that I live inside of and teach came from. So the transition was challenging and I had made multiple high stakes pivots. So I'm again, dad, two houses, the burn rate is high. So I'd pivoted from career in ways from jobs or consulting gigs or whatever, out of them altogether and into the other ones. And that was pretty hairy. Like that was tough, but that's why I teach it now. Because, okay, here's what I would have done if somebody had taught me and I could have avoided a lot of the threat. A lot of guys don't change out of what they're doing because obviously if they're making good money, they're afraid. It becomes precious to them, right? And it's true. It's a big risk. That's why it's called a high stakes pivot. So a lot of men don't do it because they can lose. But what they don't understand is like they don't have when people think about changing, because like when I'd go from consulting to consulting, I'd cut away the chute. I was free until like falling until I found the next thing. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it. And that's what people think to use their passion means quitting their job, just giving it all up and then going into what they think they're passionate about. And that's not how that works. You learn how to operate inside of your passion. But what you do is you start redesigning, reconstructing, and only sometimes do you have to replace your career. That was my span from 2008 till today, was me literally walking point, and no matter how bad things got, I just kept standing back up and going, and there's been plenty of dark nights for that. When I did move to this final business, that was a lot of money I gave up, that was guaranteed, and I did it right before COVID, and I was smart, though I brought in an investor, but I wasn't smart enough to predict COVID because he got scared and bailed immediately, and then luckily, though, I had developed this framework, and that's what pulled me through and allowed me to make the business work.
Wow. Yeah. A couple questions there. You mentioned a business school. Can you share the name of that?
It was called the Aji Network. I think it's called something different now, but it's gonna have the word Aji. It might be the Aji Advantage. Greg Scharnagel is the president. He'd be running that now.
Cool, cool. And then can you share the name of the person that you met that inspired you to change the way you were living and head down the path?
Yeah, it was the founder of the Aji Network.
Okay,
Toby Hecht. He was the one that I kinda came back around to, and it was kind of, in a, uh, how do I say it? Not direct contact. What I did is studied, then I went out looking for all this other stuff. And then what really happened is everything I'd learned there, fundamentally speaking. Now, the thing about fundamentals is you can't just use them right away typically. So people would actually hire me to take what I learned there and then implement them in their company. But what I realized looking back when I was like, oh man, I'm in trouble was like, oh no, the answer is inside of there. Especially with the permanent domains of human concern when I realized what purpose was. And that was the big epiphany that pulled me forward.
wow. How about spirituality? Are you Christian? Do you go to church?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think the better way to say it these days is a follower of Jesus rather than Christian. I don't mind saying Christian, but I do get that some of our Christian brothers and sisters from back in the day really beat the name up a bunch. But yeah, I read the Bible every day. I want to be more than an example for my kids, somebody that they can follow. Makes sense to study the guy that created the entire universe, right? Just to understand that's where another reason place purpose came from. When I did that mind map, it was Galatians, the fruit of the Holy Spirit. I'm like, okay, if I got this stuff right, the one thing I know is that I'd have the fruits of the Holy Spirit available to me: patience, peace, kindness, things like that. That was a big thing for me. That was a driving factor. When I teach purpose, I teach people they can do it by themselves with their culture, or they can do it with God. So when you define, discover, and design your purpose and you do it with God, you literally walk away. What were the Blues Brothers? They used to say, I'm on a mission from God. But you like every day, like it's like, oh, I have these purposes to fulfill. They're given to me by God. So you want to talk about resilience and waking up on fire, like you can't beat that.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I like to touch on it in the podcast because I generally don't invite people to come on who I don't believe are spiritual. I've learned the hard way that if you're heading down the right path, that God will continue to put the right things in your path. Sometimes those things seem like they're massive obstacles and you feel like maybe you're Job from the Bible. On the one hand, on the other hand, you learn and grow so much with everything that's happened. You mentioned COVID. We touched on 2008, the Great Recession. I grew up going to church, and on the one hand, on the other hand, as a kid, it's confusing. Even as an adult, like lately, I've been working my way through the Old Testament, and the number of entire, I guess you could call them clans that were completely eliminated as the Israelites were kind of progressing through different territories. There was a lot of death and destruction as that was occurring. That's not often touched on these days in the popular religious teachings. So it can be confusing to read through that on the one hand. On the other hand, you mentioned I'm a follower of Jesus, a follower of the teachings of Jesus, I think is what you said. That's where the tide really shifted, in my opinion. It brings me to another question for you. I'm sure you're fully aware of what happened to Charlie Kirk. You saw that. I'm sure you probably have opinions on that, how it happened, why it happened, that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on what Israel is doing now? Do you believe that there are potentially some more radical or extreme objectives they have than to simply just eradicate the guys that are basically the terrorists? Do you think that there's more to the equation than what we're being presented with as the general public?
This often surprises people, but I consume zero news, and I'll tell you why. So I was taught that gossip is when you tell somebody about something that's going on and that person can do nothing about it. That's the definition of gossip, right? Or how what I was taught. The thing with purpose, when you get clear on your purpose, one of the benefits of purpose is it protects you from the massive amounts of information that is getting hurled and thrown at you all day, every day. How does it relate to me not paying attention to the news? One, I can do nothing about it. So I consider it gossip. Two, I've been in war zones and listened to news broadcasts, and what they said I know was not true. Three, the purpose of news is what? It sells eyeballs to advertisers. And I don't have any problem with that, but I don't see any connection to what's going on overseas unless I went back into my SEAL role. That is another thing too. If there's things like that going on, I'll start to get the song in me. You know what I mean? And then I want to go and operate somewhere. I know that's surprising to a lot of people, but I don't see how anything I would learn on the news about that would impact my ability to use my passion to fulfill my purposes.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So you don't like literally no news at all. You consume.
Zero news.
Wow. Wow. That's interesting. I mean, honestly, I certainly don't watch the news. I don't have time to read the news, but every once in a while I'll just scroll through, see what the headlines are. And of course, my friends and family talk about the news. But yeah, it's just very interesting to see. I totally agree with what you said about the feeding eyeballs advertising. The war and the murder, domestic issues, all that kind of stuff is what gets people's attention. And they use that, I hate to say it, but make money. It's crazy.
Yeah, and again, I don't have any moral problem with it whatsoever. How I would have somebody think about it, that if that fired somebody up, I would ask them this, be like, okay, map out your life, all the parts of your life, see what's working and what's not working. And I know if they do it, they're going to come to a bunch of red, right? And I'm like, okay, do you have extra time and energy to devote to something else? And that's what I would challenge anybody with. And again, I'm not trying to get people to stop watching the news. I've never watched the news and felt better. I like at a, when I do see news, when I'm at a hotel and you turn on the TV and it seems to always just come onto the news so that I'm walking around shaving or getting ready. I remember I was on a trip not too long ago and it was like somebody was killed in LA. A congressperson was telling military people not to follow orders, and I got scared. I was like, "Oh, I had to turn it off." I was like, "Oh, geez, good God." But I'm like, what would I do about any of that? Like, what would I do? Nothing. There's nothing I can do about that. And I think one of the best things we can do as a country is to lead our families. Think about if everybody in this country was living as their authentic self, fulfilling all of their purposes that they were created for. I'm like, okay, let's start there. Then after that, then might start thinking about something else. It doesn't mean I don't care about other people who need help, but it's like there's people starving and dying. There'll be babies who die tonight because they don't have enough food. That's something I could pay attention to because I could do something about that.
Right. Yeah. We could go way down a, we could have a whole episode about that because you can get real deep real quick, especially with your experience in active combat and having to fight like l- evil, the stuff that you guys had to go stop and active SEALs are currently having to stop. Put the media aside. There are things that are happening that have to be addressed. And with all that being said, we're the only species that doesn't actively do everything it can to ensure its own survival. It's really odd. And I'm guessing if I were you and I had been in active duty, I probably would have been thinking, like, it's crazy that I'm out here risking my life to do what's right. On the one hand, on the other hand, humans for a long time have had everything we need, all the resources and technology we need to ensure no babies die at night from starvation. It's this like real interesting world that we live in. People are now saying there's a 30% chance that AI will become so smart that it will deem us as a parasite. Basically Terminator movie type stuff where Skynet becomes active and AI decides that we shouldn't be in control anymore. If you look at the logic there behind why that could happen, or if a hyper intelligent alien species or something were to come and analyze our planet and look at what we're doing and not doing, it's pretty wild that we spend as a species so much time, energy, and other resources on fighting each other.
It's silly that there are grown men and women who still are resolving conflict through violence. What is that? Like, what is that all about? You don't let a child go out to the playground and resolve conflict by punching the other child. Like even the kids, it's a crazy thing. Now I know evil's out there, and I'm not saying I'm not capable, and I'm not saying I would not produce violence against it if I had to. But let me point something else out with the whole purpose thing. So earlier I mentioned there's few sources that you could obtain your purpose from. People are like, "Oh, I want to find my purpose." Purpose is not something you find. It's just like passion. It's not something you find. It's a pragmatic exercise, and like, yeah, I guess in a way you find it, but more. I'd say you just reveal it. Like what I'm saying is, our purpose and passion is already there for everybody. They just don't know how to like filter their sensors so that they can see theirs, right? But when I'm talking about purpose, we can establish purpose by going to our culture, which that's a horrible idea, or by ourselves, which is just another way of going through culture. We can do it with a tribe of people, like that's what the people I teach, like, all right, there's a discourse you can go to, and then there's God, or some combination of all of those. But think about this. So I believe my purposes are mapped out and clear. I believe like they are done in prayer with conversations with God. And I believe that those are the purposes He's given me to fulfill, right? So, what force, if you're Christian or even spiritual, what force in the universe would want to pull us off of that purpose? So, if God, right, the tower of love, or you know what I mean, the creator of everything, like, hey, I'm making human beings and I'm giving them a purpose to fulfill, and it applies to the building of my kingdom. What force would want to distract people from that? Think about it. Not a good one. That to me starts to fall. I don't want to get all radical and have people freak out, but that starts to fall under spiritual warfare. So, what force would put something on TV or on my Instagram feed that would be like, oh, I want to get him all riled up. I want to get him pissed off and excited and not paying attention to what his purpose he was given was today. So, that's another part of purpose. And it's just so dang peaceful. I call it linguistic filter. It just doesn't show up. Like I don't hear it. The stuff doesn't get through to my brain. And the times that it does, it's like a shock. I'm like, oh my God, they're still at it. And it's like delete.
Yeah, so you don't consume the news at all, but you are, I'm sure, aware of what's going on in Iran right
Not
now.
really. Not really. I know there's a war going on, but I don't know anything about it, honestly. And
Wow.
if somebody has something to tell me, hey, Eric, you need to know this, Eric, because you can now go do this and do something about it. I'd be interested. I'd listen. But if you like again, I don't want to fire people up, but what are you going to do about it?
Right, right. Yeah, the reason I asked is just because it's like the way and of coming full circle to what sells, why the news covers what it does. There's a lot of doom and gloom and they want people to be scared. I will also say though that what we are dealing with now as a result of the military operations that are occurring over there is fuel prices are going up. When fuel prices go up, the cost of other goods go up, stuff like that. You and I are aligned in a lot of ways, like the ways we think, act, live. I guess what could be my last question here, because it's all encompassing, is do you think it's possible for us as a species to get to the point where there is no war?
Of course, yeah, 100%.
What are your thoughts on what it'll take to get there?
God, like I taught by a pastor. They're like, you know what? People get all fired up about the laws. No law is going to make the change. It's the morals and beliefs of humans. That's what's going to make the change. So if someone like read the New Testament, like read to the New Testament, and if everyone read that, and again, I'm not trying to proselytize or anything like that. That's not my role here. But if everyone read that, you just read the big one, right? Jesus, what's the number one commandment? Love God with all your might. And the second one is to love others as you would want to be loved. I'm paraphrasing everybody. They don't memorize things. And then he elevated it. And then he goes, love others as I loved you, AKA he sacrificed himself for mankind. Whether you believe it actually happened or not doesn't matter. Just read the story. The solve is right there in front of us. It's right there in your Bible, New Testament. I understand the Old Testament can get a little confusing, right? That's why there's a new one. But yeah, I was just reading Joshua today. You mentioned that. I was just thinking about that today. I was like, gosh, bless, man. I got to really reconcile. Like, he didn't just say wipe out the warriors, he said everybody to include women and children. I'm like, whoa, that's something to wrestle with. But I was also taught that the Bible isn't written like to me, it's written for me. So I read the Old Testament so I understand the character of God, and then I have to work to reconcile that. And some things aren't super easy, but the New Testament's pretty dang easy. Like that one's clear. Love others as you would want to be loved. That'll solve it. Who's going to shoot somebody else? You don't want to get shot because you disagree with somebody. That's the answer.
It's like amazing that you mentioned Joshua because that's exactly where I am. Growing up and throughout my life, I've read the Bible in parts, but I never read the New Testament from start to finish or the Old Testament all the way through to the New Testament from start to finish. So this time around, I started with the New Testament, read it, and then I went back to the Old Testament. What are the odds? I don't even know how many books in the Bible, but the odds that you were reading the same exact part that I've read within the last few days and having the same exact thoughts, Eh, obviously, we were supposed to have this conversation today. I don't know if you started in the beginning and making your way through. Before Joshua, there's Deuteronomy, and in Deuteronomy, there's a lot of similar stuff and pretty intense. Like you said, women and children, there's all sorts of stuff about women that engage in sexual activity before they're married, put them on a pole in front of their father's house, stuff like that. It's very extreme. And honestly, that's why I asked the question earlier about the Israelites, the people, Israelis. I was heading in that direction earlier because it's since I do get to hear from other people primarily, or I see headlines about what's going on, there are reporters who are being assassinated who are trying to report the truth on some of the things that are occurring either at the direction of or by the Israeli government. That's where I'm concerned. As you said, there's not really much I can do about it. But with your experience in the military and being on the tip of the spear, operating at the level you did for as long as you did, it almost seems like there's a ultimate battle of good versus evil that's playing out like right now. Well, talking about the Bible, there's Revelations, and in Revelations, there's also very extreme content about what's going to happen when Jesus comes back. We can go really deep, really quick down a philosophical rabbit hole, but yeah, I wanted to pick your brain on that stuff because it's extremely interesting to me.
It definitely is interesting. For me, like, it wouldn't be a rabbit hole we could go down. Like, you might be able to go down it with somebody else. Like, I wouldn't do it. Some people, they're supposed to do that. Some people need to go down that. Everyone's got their purpose, right? Here's the thing, like, this happens with my daughters too. We'll get in different conversations, and I'll typically finish the conversation. I go, and you know what, the one thing we didn't do? We didn't talk about or do, we didn't go try to help somebody who's suffering probably within 2 square miles of us. What we got is interesting, like you said, and we can talk about it, but it's, am I loving others as I would want to be loved? And if I'm hungry on the streets of Encinitas by the beach, I'd want someone to maybe come give me some food. So and I'm not saying, gosh, it's not like I'm out there doing that kind of stuff all the time either myself. Like, that's a struggle. Like, that's probably, talk about like a sin of omission. That's something I think about. But it's just an interesting thing, right? Like, what force in the universe would want us not to go love somebody else as we would want to be loved, when, if you believe in the New Testament and you believe in Jesus, he said very specifically to do that. And then he also warns us that when the day comes, I just read this today. This is Luke 17, like the end of Luke 17, right? And he's like, when the day comes, two people are going to be lying in bed. One's going to get snatched up and be okay, and the other one's going to get left behind. There's no warning. It's like Sodom and Gomorrah, people just going about their business. All of a sudden, well, boom, that one hit me. And that's, again, that's the Bible, not written to me, but it's written for me. Same with the Old Testament. The Old Testament, that's some pretty radical stuff. How I resolved it in my mind, well, those people were clear. God was talking to them. Like, God's speaking to people back in those days. So you got to be pretty rotten not to listen. You know what I mean? But from the context of why do I read the Old Testament, is like, one, I got to know what's in there so I can lead my children. But two, like, I'll read things and they're like, okay, well, God has a history of handing people their butts when they don't do what he commanded them to do. In every instance, I'm like, okay, yeah, those people were obviously clear about what he said to do. So that's the beauty of reading the Bible. People get all spun up about that too. What's sin, what's not sin. I'm like, that's for your father in heaven to tell you. And the only way to do that is go have a conversation with them. But that's, again, for me, because I'm reading it every day, I'm like, I know what he's telling me. He's telling me to love others like I want to be loved. Like, I'm supposed to be helping people. And then if everyone's supposed to be helping each other, then no more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's similar to some of the stuff that Larry said when he joined us. It's definitely the right way. And hopefully, and then this is my way of giving back, is trying to help others find the light and be better and do better through having people like yourself on to share your thoughts and feelings and directions based on what you've learned. With that being said, we've already touched on your book, Raising Men. As I mentioned, I believe earlier, just finished it myself. Awesome book. Highly recommend it. You've got Average Frog. And is that the best way to get in touch with you is through your website?
Yeah, averagefrog.com, or I think ericdavis215.com, but both of those point to the same website.
And
Yeah,
you
the
mentioned
best place for get in touch with me is to go in there and something will pop up, probably one of those annoying pop-ups that say put your email. That's the best way is for people to put their email in there, then we'll be connected. And then as I do stuff, I share it there.
and then I noticed you're relatively active on Instagram. Do you if people DM you on Instagram, is that an option too?
So another thing with purpose and passion and living in harmony, I don't check my email or text messages or messages very often at all.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a weird thing. It kind of messes people up actually because they think I'm being rude. I don't want to live out of my email inbox all day. That's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. And unfortunately, in my industries, or the industry that my companies operate in, unfortunately, a fact of life for me right now.
You know how many times I've heard that from people? But in my job, I'm giving you a hard time, but I teach something called the ultimate calendar. Like, okay, what's the calendar that has you at your best, a really good life? And anytime with a business owner, executive, it's always like, oh, I can't do that with what I do. I'm like, every time, but there's always a way. Is my point. Sorry, I'm giving you a hard time, but
Oh, no, no, it's you're right. You're 100% right. I'm trying to remember the name of the book that there's like the 4-hour work week. There's another one. I think it's called Buying Back Your Time. Dan Martell, I think he wrote that one. And yeah, I was heading down that path and honestly almost there right before all the interest rate hikes started in early 2022. Being an entrepreneur, there are times where, and we touched on it, I think, earlier in this conversation, where you either do what you have to do to ensure your team continues to march, or you have to deal with some pretty serious consequences from a financial standpoint. And it's unfortunate, but if there is no money, there is no much of anything, especially when your company is responsible for paying bills and payroll. The challenging part is figuring out how to maintain your independence as much as possible. And that's another kind of philosophical thing is you got to focus on being as happy as possible in every moment because nothing's guaranteed except for death and taxes.
yeah, I'll give you one more thing just with the information. You mentioned a few books. And obviously I write books. There's nothing wrong with books. But one and we talked about you brought up AI a little bit too. So the reason why AI is not going to take over because it's not human. So all AI can do is provide value to human beings. As soon as you stop providing, it's like you can't make an airplane that requires a runway bigger than any of the existing runways, right? So AI needs to do that. Now, what AI has done is that now information's at your fingertips. So what you're just mentioning about the emails, like, oh, there is. You could go to ChatGPT or Claude, whatever you use, and give me a strategy for no longer being a slave to my email inbox. And the information it gives you is going to be correct. This is why sometimes on social media, you'll see 20 somethings doing videos, and I'm like, wow, that's incredibly wise and insightful. And I know that person's too young to have come up with that on their own because they haven't lived through the very things they just solved for, but they could Google it or chat GPT it, right? So, one of the things to really pay attention to, and this is for everybody, is transformation. So remember I was talking about how what happens to people, it goes like this. People go, they do their job first. Their career is like bam, number one, and then their life, their family, their friends, their fitness, whatever time and energy and creativity and currency is left over, they try to squeeze their life into that box. Make sense? There's that tension. Those two things are at odds. So in my when I went against that, I realized I have a paper on my website about it. So I think it's called I Wasn't Good Enough. I think that's what it's called. But I realized like, oh my gosh, I'm not smart enough or strong enough to harmoniously have those sides working together. When I go to do something that takes care of my personal life, it's going to compromise my ability to do something in my work life. Most men will resonate with this. When they go to operate or execute a strategy in their work life, it's going to break their ability to care for a strategy they have in their personal life. That's assuming anyone even wrote strategies down for their personal life, right? And that's the tension. And what I learned was, like I said, all the books, there's no amount of information that's going to get me out of it. It's strategic transformation. Oh, I need to identify my purpose, because then all of the roadblocks that come up in front of me, I can consider that God's custom made curriculum for me. So I need to develop as a father, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a leader. I need to develop in a very specific way. So he's given me these obstacles, but it's transforming who I am. I've noticed a lot of people are caught up in all the information, and I see that with AI. I've seen that with my own student. Oh yeah, I AI'd how to do this. Then a month later, I'm like, hey, how'd that work out for you? Like, oh, I don't, it's gone. Like, yeah, you scratched the itch of being interested. You got the dopamine hit of getting the answer, or what was the answer by proxy, right? Because the answer is actually, you have to do real work. You have to do writing. You have to build the calendar, right? You have to do the life, what I call the life purpose map. Those are the things that change who we are as a human. And again, I'd push back even on what you're saying about the email and the industry. That's there's everything about everyone to say that what it is, it's a different kind of human. And I don't mean that to have me sound special, but it's, oh no, I've intentionally turned myself into a different kind of human, the kind that does not spend his time in his email inbox or have people call me and yank around my schedule and things like that. Because how the heck can I stay fit? You know what I mean? How can I stay present? How can I stay healthy if I don't have complete control over my calendar? Anyways, transformation would be for the little kicker for the podcast potentially. I'm seeing a lot of people get trapped in that because of AI.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground, and there's this balance that you've found that is awesome. Most Americans are nowhere near that, from how healthy they are to or not, to what their definition of happiness they believe it should be at work. So it takes work, and the word you just used, transformation, when it's it's interesting how, as I touched on earlier too, God puts you through things to teach you lessons and to hopefully transform. And I think there's some magic in taking those signals. As I have gotten older, I've learned that we have to not try too hard to control anything, because technically we're not in control. God is. And with that being said, we still have to, as you said, transform.
Yeah, it'll keep you busy for a lifetime, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you joining us, and it's been a great conversation. And maybe we could do a volume two someday.
Yeah. Yeah, lots more to unpack for sure. Yeah, I enjoyed being here as well. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks again. Looking forward to talking to you soon.